Welcome to this paper cutting class on making a geometric Christmas tree. To start off with, you're going to need the template provided for the class. You're going to need to print this out on printer paper. Alternatively, you can print it directly onto the card, but if in case you cannot do that, I'll show you how to do it otherwise. You'll need a cutting implement and a cutting mat. So I've chosen some A4 150 gram paper, so it's a little bit thicker. It's maybe 2 or 3 sheets of printer paper thick. Usually I would print off the actual template onto this myself, but in case that's not possible for you, I'm going to show you how to use a regular printer paper piece as a stencil. You're going to need some masking tape, preferably something that's easy release if possible. You're going to go ahead and take your stencil sheet, that printed paper copy, and put it on top of your cutting mat. You want to make sure that your sheet that you're cutting into, in this case the green sheet, that'll be the color of my tree, and the sheet that you're cutting through on top are lined up as best as possible. In this case, it's not a big deal if it isn't, because we're just going to cut something out of the center of it, but it helps to tape it down correctly. There are 3 pieces here, a large, a medium, and a small, with a cross in the center of each one. These crosses allow you to put the piece below it into it so that they stack. Take your masking tape, go ahead and tape over each edge. If you have a cutting mat that's the same size, you can just tape right around. Go ahead and put it on all 4 sides. This will really help hold it down. Then you're just going to go ahead and start cutting. You just follow around the outline of each shape. I tend to stop after each direct line. This helps make it easy. And you can certainly overcut with this, so cut all the way across and then beyond the actual line. Just make sure not to cut into your next shape. What you're cutting out here are actually pyramids with flaps on each side, and those flaps you get to glue down, and that will actually form the pyramid shape. So you just go ahead and follow around the edge of each one. Now, if you've printed it off directly onto the paper, you don't actually need to do this. You could, for instance, just use a pair of scissors, but some of those corners are a little bit tight, and you want to be, particularly on the triangular shapes like this one, as precise as possible, because that is actually your outer edge. Where you see those little flaps, those little wings, those you can be a little less precise with because you're just going to glue them down and they'll be hidden on the inside. So go ahead and trace around each one of these shapes. And then when you've completed the shape, you should be able to pop it out. But don't forget to cut that cross. If you've forgotten where you are, go ahead and just feel it with your finger. That will help you find it, if in case you can't see it. It doesn't particularly matter if you get the cross perfect or where it is, just so long as it's roughly in the center and it follows the correct rotation there. You should be able then just to pull this off, and then just using the tip of your blade, pull the piece you've cut right out. Now I've already cut this one out as well, so you can just go ahead and pull that one out. Then go ahead and do your last shape. Again, it's super easy to rotate the mat and just cut each line directly, but try not to ever cut into the shape that has been shaded out. Now you're going to need some glue. You could also use glue dots or some double stick tape, and you will need a ruler. One of the things we're going to use the ruler for now is to help make the creases in the actual shapes that you've cut out. This will make sure that you get it as straight as possible. This is what I meant by a wing. You're essentially creating the same shape that you've already cut out next to it, that triangular shape, but it's got this little bonus flap on it, and that's what we're going to glue down. So you're going to go ahead and line it up as best as possible from that notch at the base to the tip, and then you're going to use the knife or the scissors or something just a little bit blunt to go ahead and score that. You want to score it from, again, that notch all the way to the tip. I'm going to use the back end of my knife here, so not the cutting blade, and just gently pull it across once or twice. That'll give me a nice score into this card. And then I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. This means that we've essentially scored out the same shape that you've already cut out in that next flap over, so that each of those sides will be the same size. You're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, but you'll see this makes it so much easier to go ahead and fold those flaps down and get that nice, clean, crisp shape that you're looking for. This will be really easy after you've done it a couple of times, and this progression will really help you make sure that all of your lines go down in the correct order. Once you've finished that, you're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing again to the other side, lining up that notch at the base to the tip, so you can create that nice triangular shape. Once you've scored this flap again, you can also do what we did before. Lift those two flaps up. And these should always be drawn in towards the same side. It doesn't really matter which side you're going from, particularly in this case where the card is the same color on both sides. But you want to make sure your flaps go in the same direction. Now you're going to use these flaps as a guide for your ruler, so that you can essentially block out the square on the bottom that will form the base. So you should, from each notch on each side, be able to create a square. So go ahead and score that one, turn it round, and then score the next side. And then you'll fall around and do the same thing on the following two sides. Now that that's done, you can fold up each one of those sides of the pyramid, nice and crisp and even. And you'll see that this base, which is a square, starts to take shape. And with that cross in the center, the points of the piece below it are going to fit right into that. I find it easiest now to go ahead and sort of poke your finger through gently. Like this, and just fold them in so that it makes it easier later on and doesn't destroy the shape. Now that's not going to be a perfect square because my cuts are not exactly even, but again, this doesn't matter. You just have to provide a little bit of space. And so that's the basic shape that you're going to make for each size. So you take your glue and just put a tiny bit on that flap. Again, if you've got glue dots or you're using double stick tape or something like that, that's also fine. This should be super easy. If you're using glue like this, I find it's easier to go ahead and put it on both of those sides, just gently, just a little bit. You don't need very much because you don't want it oozing out the side. Put it on both of those sides so that I can just press it together so that those two sides will start to stick together, and then fold the flap over the top. Now, if your glue is not exceptionally tacky, you just need to sort of hold the shape in place for just a little bit. It takes about 10-15 seconds until it starts to really adhere to the paper. And just gently press down and make sure nothing is bubbling. You can go ahead and turn it over if you want, as I'm doing here, to just hold it down so that there's even pressure applied on all of those sides. So there we go, that's nice and glued down. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. Just go ahead and put the glue on those two flaps. In this case, the Uhu glue has this nice little applicator tip, which allows me to put just a thin layer down. Then close that up, press it into place, and again, use my mat to help hold that down. There we go, nice pyramid shape starting to set, and this should be dry in just a couple of minutes. And while that's drying, you can hold those pieces down, just make sure that they're sticking, set that off to the side, and go ahead and put my other pieces together. I'm going to speed the rest of this up, but in case you have any problems, you can go ahead and watch it, or go back and watch what we've just done. Now at last, the best and easiest part, which of course is to simply stack them up against each other, one on top of the next, biggest at the base, followed by smallest at the top. Now the base actually has a cut in it, which is not necessary, but if you wanted to, you could enlarge the template that you've been given to create even more pieces that go below it. If you find that there's any trouble getting them to sit right, just go ahead and adjust that bit at the bottom. It sits together and has this cute little adorable geometric tree shape. Thanks for joining me.